What is kindfulness? Kindfulness is a word I just stole from a podcast by a guy called Rob Babeo, an excellent British meditation and Dharma teacher. It could mean different things. I think the emphasis here is that mindfulness sounds a bit heady. Actually, this is not a great translation from the Pali, which could be called remembrance, which again is a bit heady. However, it sounds very like cognitive, and it can be practiced that way, right? We can get sharper and sharper and sharper at practicing concentration. So you can concentrate on the breath, for example, at the exclusion of the whole body. There's some risks in that. The rest of the body, you can concentrate on thoughts or whatever it is, the sensations of whatever. So this can get us very, very concentrated. I did concentration meditating, counting breaths for some years, and I did get sharper. I got more concentrated, the ability to use that concentration, which is a positive thing, but I didn't become a nicer human being by all accounts. So what was going wrong there? Well, I wasn't developing compassion, I wasn't developing the other side. So in Buddhist theory, it's generally called two wings of the bird. We have wisdom and compassion. So yes, concentration on one hand, very helpful. Insight, again, very helpful. And integral to that should be this sense of kindness. Yeah, you'll hear about metta practice as a separate activity, which I highly recommend, and that was certainly beneficial for me to try some metta practice. Something's called loving kindness, universal friendliness, I think it's a better translation, is certainly very helpful as an adjunct to the mindfulness practice. So it's nice to see sort of research being done on what something's called heart practices, the metta, the karuna, etc. There's four main ones in traditional Theravada Buddhism. I could add to those gratitude or forgiveness, other potential sort of heart practices. So I think that's really a helpful adjunct. However, the mindfulness itself should be most effective. Should be ugly, isn't it? But most effective when practiced with this sense of kindness. So you're kindly resting on the breath. Is it how you do it as well? So it's like, if it's like I must concentrate. I was trained in some Zen schools. There's a bit of that attitude, must concentrate, stay on the breath. That's not a very kind way of practicing mindfulness. The distinction between the sort of heart practices and the concentration practices, I think at higher levels dissolves, and it becomes a sort of kind resting on the breath or the body or whatever the object of the meditation is. However, I think this is much needed, particularly if we look at it in a sort of corporate sense, teaching people mindfulness, teaching people concentration, getting sharper, mentally more focused. Doesn't necessarily make people more ethical, so we can include the ethical practices in this, which, in Buddhism, mindfulness was never taught without ethical practices. I mean, generally, like generosity would be the first thing you'd practice, dana, before, and then the kind of ethical practices, there's various systems, and then your meditation maybe later on, yeah? So it's a bit weird, we put it back to front. I think to be a bit careful with this in a corporate context. We're not just making people sharper, this is what happened with me, not necessarily making them more ethical, nice people. It's a bit naive to think that just, by teaching people breath meditation, they're going to become nicer. I think a good parallel for this was the samurai. Samurai often practice Zen, concentration, kind of transcendent type stuff. It's all stuff to be left behind or stuff to be very focused or sharp. And didn't see, it's not a big part of that tradition to practice the Brahma Viharas, the four standard heart practices in earlier Buddhism and sort of later Japanese Buddhism. And the samurai were a bunch of assholes. There's no doubt about it. They were fascist, they were repressive, they were violent. Now, I'm not saying they didn't have any noble qualities, but I think to look at them as sort of look at them as something to be aspired to ethically would be very weird. So yeah, that's a warning from history which could be replicated in the kind of pure mindfulness as the samurai did. Concentration practices primarily they were doing could also be replicated in the corporate world as we see this rise of mindfulness. So kindfulness as well as mindfulness, I think, is helpful.